Thank you all for joining us today. We have talked about before that our plan is to meet with the executive work group as well as the other work groups on a relatively quarterly basis. This is June. We last met in April. It's a little bit tighter, closer together due to summer schedules, also where we're at with the EIS. And of course today, and you'll see on the agenda, we'll talk about the anticipated timing of our next work group meeting and what that looks like as well. And so we're looking at our work progression for the EIS and then thinking about, vacations, summer schedule, and things of that nature as well. You'll see that our agenda format and the way that our items come together are relatively consistent. We are purposely scheduling our meetings to the best of our ability to have the community sounding board ahead of the work group meetings so that we can share the feedback received, and then having the technical work group and funding and governance work group. Those meetings are falling tomorrow. So as we walk through the agenda today, we will at certain points describe where we will discuss items in more detail with those work groups and how they interconnect with our process with you and how we solicit your feedback as well. So as part of that kind of similar theme in our agendas, we want to start with an update or briefing of the community sounding board that occurred last night. And Ray will do that for us, and then part of that agenda topic will be some recreational use questions that we'd like to bring forward and ask of all of you as well today. So with that, I'll turn over to Ray.
Hi everyone. So yes, we had our second CSB meeting last night from 6 to almost 9. We finished early by a couple of minutes. The two primary agenda items, the first was just an update on the project status, particularly update on some of the fieldwork methodologies that are, or analysis methodologies I should say. We had quite a few questions about those, probably more questions than we had time for, at least for some folks in the group. But had some good discussion around that, and then the majority of the meeting we spent in small group discussions around how they would use the space, they've used it in the past, how they use it now, how they would use it if it remained a lake, but where you could access the water again, and how they would use the space if it were converted into an estuary or hybrid. So we had 3 groups of about 8 in each group, and went through each of those 3 questions and then reported back. Lots of great discussion, lots of opinions, lots of opportunities to do what a sounding board does, and that's share your perspectives. And also, I think for us and for the project team especially to think about as they go into the methodology for recreation, what do people need to know? The key takeaway I took from that interaction was that when we got to the discussion of the estuary, the group really needed what does that look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? Because I can't necessarily tell you how I would use that space if I don't know what that space looks like. So that's the kind of brief synopsis. We'll have a summary as we do with all of our meetings. It'll be available in a few weeks. And I guess with that, Tessa, do you have other thoughts to add? And we can take questions.
I was going to share a bit of detail on what we heard relative to specific questions that we asked the group. And I know Jesse was planning to go over some of those, and so maybe that's the time that I hop in. But what about Carrie? Did you have anything general to add before we?
No, I mean, I think it was a good chance for people to weigh in and kind of give some input on things that are meaningful for them.
Perfect. So what we do want to cover are the recreational use questions that Tessa and Ray covered with the community sounding board last night. Hi, Naomi. Part of what we want to bring forward to you and in even more detail tomorrow to the technical work group is an overview and discussion of various technical methodologies. The team has been putting a lot of thoughtful good work into that development, ranging from sediment transport hydrodynamic modeling to land use to wetland vegetation and recreational use. So some of what we want to touch on and the questions we're going to review and ask your opinion on as well, they tie into those methodologies. They'll touch and tie to a recreational use survey in the summer and fall. Really, we are casting the net right now and just bringing in a ton of information. So these are the 4 recreational use questions that the team went through with the Community Sounding Board last night. I think I'll let you jump in too. We're going to kind of tag team this together. But really our goal is to take advantage of our access to the community with the Sounding Board and also the access to each of the work group members, executive, technical, and funding and governance. Recreational use of the resource of the park area applies to all of us. So these questions, we want to really solicit and get everyone's input. And we have time today to allow us to walk through these with you. And if you have initial thoughts and responses you want to share, that's great. We're going to make sure we capture it. I think if you also want some time to digest and really think about these questions, you could also email us your thoughts as well. And like we always do, we will also provide the slide deck following up from the meeting and can transmit these questions as well. Do you have things you want to add, or do you want me to read one and we'll talk it, and as we go, just kind of chime in?
Yeah, that sounds good. I can give an update on just what we heard after you read each one. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
And Ray, do you wanna
I'm looking
add to?
backwards, so sorry to turn to you. So one of the first questions here is, how are you, your family, using Capitol Lake and the surrounding parks? The spatial area we're talking about here is from Tumwater Falls to Priest Point Park. So it's really understanding your existing and current use. Any initial thoughts from the group on your own use?
And maybe I can share what we heard last night and
If there's
kind
any
of gauge
voids.
whether that is consistent with that. And so, interestingly, as Jesse mentioned, we want to understand how it's used and then how often it's used. And so that'll help us to understand the baseline that the alternatives would either positively or negatively impact those types of uses. And so what we heard last night related to current use, and I facilitated one of the smaller groups, so my representation is of that group, but then with some additional dialogue at the end. But related to frequency of use, some of the group members said they don't really use the area surrounding Capitol Lake anymore because of the restricted access to the water body. And some folks said they use it moderately often. They still find, pleasure in using it passively through the walking opportunities. We heard that a lot, that the ability to walk around the lake was still a big draw, but that their frequency of use may have declined since closure, just due to either visual conditions or that restriction of access. So related to the Capitol Lake Basin, walking and the use of the parks, and then related to wildlife, a lot about bird and wildlife watching, and then we heard a number of good comments about the salmon viewing. So that was great to hear it either at the Fifth Avenue or at Tumwater Falls. And then heading in to downstream and north, Bud Inlet, all different types of boating was discussed. So canoeing, kayaking, boating of all types, and really just the kind of the use of the parks adjacent to and just north of the project area. And Ray, did you want to add to that? And then we can see if that kind of jives with.
Sure. In my group, I heard a little bit more about just the community center nature of the space as a whole, that not necessarily a specific place, but just various places around the lake are places where they take friends or they take family. Family come to town from far away. It's a place to go to say, this is what our community looks like and feels like. Of course, a little bit of talk about Lake Fair and other events like that occur right near the water. So I would second what you said there, Tessa. There was very much we use it for these things, but we don't use it for these things because we can't anymore.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, my wife and I usually walk around on part of the lake, up until the spill cleanup, we were starting to historical park. Now the trail's closed right now, so I have to park on the Shoots Parkway, kind of walk that way. Wildlife viewing, birds and creatures. And yeah, I would say the salmon, the big thing is the draw of the salmon in the fall, at the base of the falls, and at the dam are the two big places where I would view them. Yeah.
And how frequently would you say that you use the resource in that capacity? Is it monthly? Is it seasonally?
Well,
Is
walking,
it
I would say weekly.
weekly?
Yeah. Salmon, of course, only when they come in, so usually a
Season.
few days out of that window in October that they come in. And you know, for Tumwater as a whole, we have a shelter at Historic Park, very popular, clearly our most popular picnic shelter. It's booked all the time. We have a play toy down there, kids, that is packed right about now, probably, so it's raining a little bit. So that's a very popular park, that historical park area, as well, so.
So I'll just chime in anecdotally between my husband walking the dogs twice a day, every day, and me, you know, just out a lot. We live in South Cap, so that's kind of like our park. We go down and walk constantly. And it's just a joy to see on a sunny day so many people out there enjoying it with their kids on their little bikes. You know, a lot of kids learn to ride their bikes on those trails around the basin there. It's also, like you mentioned, one of our community hubs for special events. You know, we've got the Harbor Days, Lake Fair, Opening Day, Wooden Boat Festival. It's also a great starting and ending spot for a lot of the fun runs in the community. This time of year, you're always seeing some community event with a road race going around there. It's also where a lot of the toy run, the motorcycle toy runs end up going to Shoots. You know, the fireworks for Lake Fair. It is our iconic Central Park. And, you know, we'll get to, you know, the limited uses, but even though with those limited uses, it is who we are.
So, I rarely use capital A. I mean, I live in Lacey, so why? I have Nisqually right there. So, however, I do, when we decide to take my son's dogs out of the normal places to walk, we have walked around Tumwater Falls, that trail down there, and I love that. I like the setting. It kind of feels wild more than the lake. The other thing is bird watching and that kind of thing around there. We, up until now, we've had Rotary at Tumwater Falls Park, but hopefully we don't.
Duck dash, you mean?
Yeah, the duck dash, but hopefully that doesn't happen again, but,
You mean the spill, not the duck dash? Doesn't happen again.
well, the duck, hopefully it's not at Tumwater Falls again.
You mean the duck dash?
Yes,
Oh, really?
I really would like to have it someplace in Lacey since
I'd heard
it's
that.
Lacey Rotary. And the fairgrounds works better for us actually, and I don't often go to Lake Fair, so, I sometimes go to the parade, so really, I think it depends on where you live a lot of the time. If you live locally in Olympia, you use it more. If you live in Tumwater, it's probably more of a connection. If you're at Lacey, there's other things to take part in. We have lots and lots of trails without going down there. We have the Nisqually Wildlife Refuge, which is pretty unique in itself. So that's there's more birding increasing down there, I doubt if I would view less of them.
Any other input, Commissioner Zeta?
Like Cynthia, we don't live in Olympia, we're farmers, we live in South County. And so I will go to the lake for special events like those that Cheryl mentioned. We love to bring visitors to see the salmon, especially in Tumwater, not so much at the dam, it's a busy place.
Not much space to view there.
We used to like to kayak in the surrounding waters north, but since I've learned how contaminated the water is, we don't really do that so much anymore. We like to take the dogs to Priest Point Park and Brookwood.
Any other input on existing use?
Well, we can too down part of the
River.
river, and I've done that when I was younger.
I'm gonna say, go Cynthia. Little beer cooler.
I know it seems like these are basic questions, but we have to think about this EIS again being unique in that where we land, one of the key goals that are shared across all of groups and community members is really restoring or optimizing use of this resource. We often make the comparative statement that this isn't like a typical transportation EIS, where it's really, no question, it's a road. It's just give and take lanes of a road, right? There's a vast range here, so we have the ability to make sure that we do the best we can to capture really what the community wants, and everyone's a part of it. So these questions, although it's like, may sound a little bit like, oh, would you like to take your dog there? There's meaning in it. The next question was, for those of you that used Capitol Lake in the past, before the uses were restricted, how did you or your family use the lake? So we're wanting to understand, were there folks that really enjoyed what we've termed the active use of Capitol Lake, being able to be active in the water, whether that's boating, swimming, whatever.
When did the restrictions start again?
2009 was restriction due to the New Zealand mud snail.
And the
Swimming was well before that, they stopped swimming.
Mid-80s.
80.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we, oh, sorry.
I'm just gonna say, back when they used to empty the lake, we'd take our kids out and walk in the gravel bars below the falls to look for artifacts and stuff. It was kind of a cool thing to do.
What did you find?
Yeah, pieces of pottery and stuff, you know, from the old days. Whatever stuff. It's just kind of cool to be able to walk out in that area when the water was out. And the ground is plenty stable in that area too. It's sand and gravel.
So way back when, this is really tacky, and I hate to mention that I did it, but we would drag our young kids to see the floating Christmas
Oh,
island.
Christmas Island, I saw pictures of it, I was
Yeah.
long gone island too.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they loved it.
As tacky as it was.
I found a picture of that not too long ago. In the
Don't
archives,
go
they've got a
before
picture.
that.
Too late.
Then they moved it to the stormwater pond in Lacey.
Yes, they did.
That was inappropriate. So.
And then the Southtown Center even.
One question that we asked the group last night was, did you use the resource more often historically before the closure of active use? Or did your use types, were your use types different? We heard, some folks that said they used it actively for fishing or boating, or their kids learned how to swim in the lake, or they were watching hydroplane races. And what we understood from the conversation, it was, used differently in each of the basins. And I heard from my group that the use was more frequent when the water body was open. And what did you hear, Ray?
I heard exactly the same thing. It was more frequent, and it was different for each basin
Mhm.
by quite a bit.
Yeah, I think The platform that's next to I-5 right there would always be people fishing off of that.
Mhm.
When it wasn't restricted.
Okay. The next question was if the currently restricted water-based uses were restored under a long-term management alternative, would this change your use, your current use of the water body, if you were able to have that access restored?
No. Nothing.
Same thing.
We would fish.
We would kayak or canoe.
Yeah, I think that would, it would certainly open up an option to do that, the kayak or fish. Or just like I said, when the water, if it were an estuary where the water was out, just walking out on the gravel bars, I think you'd find a lot of people doing that.
That is one of the takeaway messages that I heard, was that if it was restored, they may be down there more often, back to the daily or weekly use that it was historically. And one thing that I heard frequently, I think Mayor Comment, you said this, that when you have friends in town, it would be a place that you would take out of town guests, and that may resume. And so interestingly, a draw from outside of the local area. Did you?
I would agree. Our group got creative and they had ideas like there used to be a snack stand near the swimming area. So maybe there's some economic opportunity for something like that, or boat rentals, canoe rentals, kayak rentals. We actually had someone in our group that worked, their first job was working at that snack stand, which was really fascinating. There was definitely just a lot of energy in our group with the thought of all the things they could do if the lake were accessible again.
Absolutely.
Which makes sense, right? That's why we're, a good part of why we're doing
One
this.
activity that should never come back is one that I'm ashamed to say my husband participated in at Lake Fair. They had the hole-in-one hitting golf balls into the lake. That shouldn't come back.
Okay.
I don't know about the hydroplane races either.
Yeah, I heard the hydroplane races.
Yeah, if they ever dredge that part of the lake.
There's
there's
gonna be
a
all these
lot
golf
of
balls
golf.
out there. I think it was a Kiwanis booth or something.
That's funny. And the last question, if Capitol Lake was restored to an estuary or hybrid, the shorelines would change. And would you anticipate that those changes may affect the use of the project area?
It would affect it, but I think it would add, at least for me, a different layer of what birds I would see, and I would tend to go down there for that.
Yeah, I think the most dramatic change would be the die-off in vegetation, particularly in the south basin eventually, and really opening up some of the vistas and access to the old brewery waterfront. If you look at that historically, that was open water. They brought barges up in there, and in part it's because nothing, would grow in the saltwater there. So it was much more open lake, when it was at, particularly it was at high tide, look, you could see it a lot more, see the open water, and so that would be, I think, one of the most dramatic differences. But if you think about it in terms of walking on the shoreline, I mean, we sometimes go over to East Bay, or down West Bay in those areas to walk as well, and that is essentially in a tidally influenced area, right? It doesn't really affect your walk. If anything, we see shoreline, shorebirds and it doesn't affect the upland part of your walk. It's still there. So if anything, it's a little more dynamic because it's changing a lot.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point, that even with restricted water access now, it's still a very popular place to go walk and run around. So.
We used to enjoy Miss Polly a lot before the estuary was restored down there. And a lot of people were worried that it wouldn't be as usable after it was restored. And it's great to go down there
Very
now
popular.
because
But I do think that speaks to one aspect of this, is if it were to become restored as an estuary, I think there needs to be the ability to get out over the water to, because that's really part of the,
Boardwalk like Nisqually.
that's part of the attraction of Nisqually. You get out on this long boardwalk, you look down in the water, you see the cranes there. It's a different, than looking at it from the shore, you know. And I think having some ability to access, you know, out into the fluctuating water would be an important recreational opportunity as part of that.
It
Put a
can
small
also-
canoe in.
And it can also provide access for handicapped people.
True, that too.
And I know if we just left the trails where they are, it certainly would draw it away, probably away from where, I think anyway, maybe not, but the trails where they are now may not give you as good of access to be able to see things.
Mhm.
But that's dependent on how it's set up.
Yeah, I don't agree, because I think East Bay, I mean, if you ever walk down East Bay,
Well, it's, yeah.
it's the same, it'd be like an estuary, well, it is in essence an estuary on a different scale, and the trail, I don't see any real difference. I mean, if anything, you can see the water better because you don't have all of those trees along the water.
Well, I guess I was wondering if it would make it more narrow so that the current trails would be farther away, but it may be not, I don't know that.
I would say that one thing that we heard regardless was that getting out over the water and the boardwalk concept, so that there was the opportunity to be more engaged with it, was a big takeaway message. And also that it would be a dynamic system that would potentially be more visually pleasing in terms of wildlife, and that you know, the habitat should be maintained under that option.
Yeah, I would add just similar energy around the idea. I think getting on the water, in the water, around the water, to the water, regardless of which alternative you're talking about, there was just a lot of interest in that. Definitely a sense that, well, if it's an estuary, there'd be more diversity, more animals to see, and the getting out over the water and boardwalk type scenario came up quite a bit as well.
Although, I'm not 100% sure, but whether it would be more, but rather than different. I mean, from a biologist's viewpoint, what is shorebirds that, you know, take part in saltwater as opposed to freshwater is slightly different, maybe? I don't know about
A
that.
different community that the team will be evaluating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but regardless, it would be a unique experience, different than what is now.
And I think out of the discussion too, it highlights the value of the visual simulations of the alternatives, particularly for the alternatives that are different than what it is today. So folks really can have a true, you know, sense of what it would look like and how they may use that area under that scenario. Okay, well, thank you. That was actually helpful, I think, in just grounding relative to the community input. We will also ask these questions to the other work groups as well, because it's just great to have the dialogues with people that find value and are engaged in the process. With that, what we'll transition to next is what we have titled the Measurable Evaluation Process. It is what we walked through in concept with you in April when we last met. And we've been doing good work behind the scenes. It's been super fun, and all our team has these back and forth dialogues and figuring out what makes sense and what about this and what about that. So Tessa's going to provide an update on where we're at with that and how that's taking shape. Oh, and I need to advance. Sorry about that.
Perfect. Okay, so this is really an update item in the agenda, and we wanted to just keep you apprised of how we're moving forward with this process. So this flow chart you saw last time, it should be familiar, and today's update is focused on the step 1 of the measurable evaluation process. And as you remember, this step allows us to look at all the different alternatives and concept variations to develop the alternatives that will be analyzed in the EIS. So this work really does happen in 2019. Our team, as Jesse mentioned, has started that work, and we are reviewing all proposals with the ultimate goal of putting forward an optimized version of the managed lake, the estuary, and the hybrid. And when we're through that process, which again we use evaluation criteria to move us through that process, our intention is to report that back out to you. One thing that we wanted to update this group on is that we got 2 tangible pieces of feedback from the community sounding board and from the Corps of Engineers who participated in our last meeting at the technical work group. And we discussed the evaluation criteria against which we would review all of the components or alternative variations. And they provided some feedback relative to if the evaluation should be a relative look at all specific components that could achieve a certain goal, or if they should be an independent look. And where we landed was to allow that to be a relative look, so we're kind of looking at the different options against each other and not siloing them. And so we took that feedback into our process, and we have made that change, and that's the change that we'll be implementing as we complete this.
So really quick, in practice, what that means is we found ourselves, as we're walking through this as a team, wanting it to be inherently relative, because you would say, is this component of an option technically feasible? Well, it's probably a similar level of technical feasibility as this other option, or it's more, or it's less, and you just start stacking them next to each other. And remember, our system is kind of a high, medium, low, so it's not like a numerical number or a yes or no in terms of, anyway, so we just found ourselves doing that seemed to be well in line in practice with what the Corps provided in their information, and then also from the CSB. So it sounds small, but it actually becomes meaningful in the way that it fleshes out.
And that'll hold down the line.
Yeah.
So then would you line up the alternatives and sort of rank them from whatever, 1 to 5 or whatever, kind of?
We don't rank the alternatives themselves, no.
But I don't mean overall rank, I mean for a component, say, you know, I don't know.
Cost, for example.
cost
Yeah,
or
so
water
what
access.
they'll get now is each component, and let's say that's a recreational use or something, if it's an element, right? It ends up with a kind of high, medium, low, and then you stack all of those with technical feasibility, regulatory feasibility, and you have a cumulative kind of score that gives you a color. So it ends up not a ranking, but overall, and what we sent out and reviewed last time is it ends up with a green or an orange or a yellow, right? And then from there, it allows us to say, okay, based on these criteria, this component fared the strongest across all of the criteria. It received a green, or kind of the highest ranking relative to the others. So it allows you to take all of those green components of an alternative and put them together to say, this is really the optimized version that best meets those objectives of these criteria. And that becomes the optimized alternative that moves forward into the EIS technical analysis. And then one of the questions we did receive in April in the work group meetings was, and maybe Mayor Komet, you asked this as well, does the optimized alternative as it moves forward into the EIS carry forward any of this step 1 screening with it? And the answer was no. It kind of starts fresh and clean as it moves into the EIS. It is optimized, and then it just becomes the alternative. It is the managed lake alternative, the estuary alternative. And then it will go through all of the technical analysis and review for benefits and impacts. This is a way for us to most thoughtfully, holistically look at everything that's come forward and really figure out what meets the best goals, or best meets the project goals, and make sure that an alternative, if a given alternative has a couple components that maybe aren't as strong as others, that whole alternative isn't lost. The best components of each one gets to move forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, Mel, there, at some point, some of these alternatives that have been kicked around, as you know, are just not legally feasible.
That's right.
And so I think there has to be some ability to say, yeah, that one's just not.
There will be the dropping out in the process.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
when is that?
Correct.
In-
That's
in
This year?
This year?
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah, when we next meet, we will bring forward the results of that work and everyone will see the optimized alternatives.
So,
Or I guess it depends on timing. We'll get to meetings, but, because there might be 2 fall meetings.
so does this include a potential or more than potential hybrid types of things as well?
The 3, you're looking for the best of each 3.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? When you talk about the Corps of Engineers, you're talking about the Army Corps of Engineers, so they're on our technical group?
In an ad hoc capacity, so they're not a dedicated every technical work group participant, but when we have items that fall under the Corps' jurisdiction or purview, particularly if they have a tie to future permitting under the Corps' permit process, they have been really great about being available as a resource, and we knew in April we wanted to bring forward the measurable evaluation process to all work groups, particularly the technical work group, and asked if they would participate because the regulatory feasibility question and the defensibility of screening alternatives was critical to our foundation. And they said, yes, we'll attend. So there were 2 core members that attended in April and provided some good, meaningful feedback that we're integrating in and acting on. One is what Tessa described. Yeah, so they've been great in that capacity, and then like the rest of the state and local agencies, they've provided a wealth of existing information, BAFI surveys, things of that nature as well.
Last I understood, they have a list of projects that they list as a priority for the state. Wasn't this pulled off of that list? And I don't know the terminology.
PISNERP, yeah, those are projects that are being evaluated for like restoration, prioritization, or funding, and so.
Yeah, it was a funding.
Yes.
Jeff would know more about
Oh,
that.
he would.
but
So a
yeah,
number of
okay.
years ago, Capitol Lake was evaluated, and you're right, I think in the revision, it was not retained. But the folks we're working with are from their regulatory branch, so those that really look at the permitting of proposed projects, things of that nature.
So that's, at least it's on their radar because you said the other list was a funding list?
I think that's what PISNERP focuses on, is the prioritization of restoration funding.
Yes, and I think there was, I don't remember all the details, something between the restoration part of the Corps and the navigable waters part of the Corps and how they're funding.
To get back on that list sounds kind of important.
Would be great, yeah, absolutely. We will get in a little bit, there's a tie here to when we provide you updates on our additional analysis and the funding and governance work group. So we're gonna get to the meetings that would be upcoming with you next, because again, we're kind of quarterly, but we're shifting a bit. So that's where we want to bring forward to you the optimized alternatives in the fall, and we'll talk about that as well. But is there anything else you wanted to cover?
One question that we had was about whether the EIS would include a no-action alternative, and we just wanted to confirm that we had heard that and that in carrying a no-action alternative is a required part of the EIS, and it provides that baseline under which you can compare the project action or the action alternatives, so taking action against. And we're working to develop the reasonable assumptions around that no-action alternative as we move to develop the other alternatives. And, the no action is really intended to represent the most likely future for the project area if the project was not implemented. And so we're defining that in this process as well. And that was it.
Yeah. It's actually a lot of coordination. It's kind of fun sitting with the different people because we're asking questions about how would this impact this, and it's
Can I ask another question? Sorry, I missed last
Oh,
asked
this
me,
is
so
great.
mine have already been
Oh,
answered.
that's right. So that, sorry about that. That's
Yeah,
right. That's
no,
why you're
I
like,
said-
what are you doing?
So, how many people from your firm are working on this project? And we're just trying to get a gauge, when you try to explain to people why it's costing so much and why it's taking so long, it would help me to know, like, how many people, how many man-hours and people are we, person-hours, sorry.
Well,
are we-
generally, I think you can start with there's a number of firms, right? So the team is crafted to reach in and pull from the best expertise for this project in a given area of practice. So ESA, for their vast experience with SEPA EISs, is really leading the authorship of the EIS with us. And so that's another partner. Under their umbrella of services that they're providing, they have the wetland folks and the fishery biologists and land use and archaeologists and like all of those folks, and water quality. And then we have Herrera, who's water quality and invasive species, geomorphology. Moffitt-Nickel is another partner that is providing the sediment transport and hydrodynamic modeling expertise, as Moffitt-Nickel, as well as the conceptual design, because as we take in all this information, we also have to craft that into a conceptual design that makes sense for the level of the EIS. So we have that design engineer component that threads through everything as well. That ties to the costing, so there's also the costing and constructability expertise. Goodness, and then
Eco Northwest here.
Eco Northwest, which we'll talk about, has a critical role in the project, because as everyone knows, how you govern and fund it is quite important. So we have economists, and then we also have air people and transportation people.
Yeah.
Oh, and EI, good grief, I just you're like the
It's okay.
brother right next to my son. Yes, race, yeah, and folks know enviro issues. So it ends up that you just see us routinely, but there's 20 people behind us, you know.
Right, okay, thank you for that.
Yeah,
And
So to be clear, is some of these, the consultants that work with you actually have their own companies and they're actually being brought in for their expertise on this?
that's right,
So each of these companies have to be paid for their expertise.
that's right.
Okay, thank you.
And there is just such a wide range of disciplines, environmental disciplines that could have potential significant impacts. And so the the range isn't quite as narrow as maybe some other projects that just need to look about transportation and related air quality and visual quality, but there are 14 or 15 disciplines that need to be looked at to ensure that the agency has looked at all, probable significant impacts. And then the other important note is that the alternatives are very different. And so there isn't just a slight tweak to an analysis to see what a small variation would be. They're inherently different alternatives, and so you have to set things up a little bit differently.
Yeah,
in
to your
some
point, the
cases.
freshwater versus saltwater, that is a significant difference in the communities and the wetlands and what that means to the alternatives as well. I think with that, Carrie, do you want to provide an update on third-party review? That has been an active item.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that in April. Enterprise Services had heard from various stakeholders that it would be good to have third parties, really experts in a few of these different disciplines, to take a fresh look and give us an extra set of eyes as we move forward. So we are doing that. The review is being done in 3 areas: in the water quality discipline, the hydrodynamics and sediment transport modeling, and economics. And we're really doing that to make sure that the analyses are done and conducted using industry best practices, and also to make sure that we have a reasonable level of analysis to really support that comparison of alternatives. So since we last met, we had chosen expert for the water quality review. That was done the first half of May. Got a some great comments. We had a good follow-up discussion with the team, and they're currently revising the methodology memorandum. And as soon as that's completed, we will be posting that to the website so everyone can take a look where we ended up with that. On the modeling and economics, we've done the selections, and I'm currently working on contracting. And we're anticipating that the economics review will happen the second half of June, and the modeling will be late June, early July. So those are coming up. So, and again, both of those, as soon as they're complete, we'll get them posted to the website. So I guess the last thing I want to say is thanks to all of you who provided recommendations, and also some of our work group members assisted Enterprise Services in doing the screening and the selection. So we appreciate everyone's support on that. That's what we got on that. Any questions?
From Thurston County's perspective, we're concerned about doing making sure we get all the information. And by that, our concern, and we wrote a letter from the board to Enterprise Services, that we get analysis of the upper Deschutes as well as any of the lower Deschutes. And the main issue there, obviously, is forest practices, where there's thousands of tons of commercial fertilizer and other chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, whatever you want to refer to them as, utilized by the timber industry. And it's in the drainage. Everywhere they put product eventually flows into, in this case, the Deschutes, but it's the whole Cascade Range. There's probably several million acres of privately held property that this takes place on. And it doesn't seem like there's very much knowledge other than by the industry and the Forest Practice Board about how this all takes place. It's permitted by ecology and overseen by DNR, but I can't find any baseline information in our staff as to what should it look like. And for a particular harvest, which a harvest runs about 40 years now, they do about maybe 3 applications, 2 to 3 applications during that period of time. And the industry is very concerned about their financial investment, so I'm sure they're not overdoing it, but still, I grew up on that Deschutes River, and I can tell you that, 60 years ago, as a youngster playing out there, there was no algae like there is now, and now there is a lot of algae, and that practice has only been going on for about the last 50 years. So
I share your concerns with pollutants impacting water quality. And another thing that I've learned from the marine biologists at the college is that a huge factor in the algae blooms is temperature. And of course, we're seeing very rapid global warming, so that's an issue too.
I think that plays into that. Although with the logging industry, in their defense, they've been leaving buffers along the river now for at least the last 40 years. So I think the global warming aspect might be playing into it more. But at farm areas where it goes through fields, and no shade and that type of thing as well. But we don't have, the brewery's not there anymore, and we really don't have much dairy activity on the Deschutes anymore. So I'm just afraid that we're missing something if we don't analyze the upper Deschutes. And we might end up coming to a conclusion of a solution that with not having all the facts. I'm not pointing fingers, I think we need to know. We had the industry come down and give a presentation to the board one time. And it sounded very much like when the tobacco industry was giving Congress the updates about, I almost wanted to go out and have nitrogen for lunch when they got done with the presentation. So
I share your
I
concern
mean-
with having a healthy river flowing into.
Yeah, I mean, we
Lake Deschutes
need to know, and we all live in a drainage, and that, and if you look it up, you know, look up in the headwaters, it's steep country. And they have to put this fertilizer on when it's damp, at least in like rainy weather. They won't put it on when it's a storm coming in. But, you know, if you watch it, they're flying helicopters all over up there and putting tons of product on. Having lived there where that product is, there's no grouse, for an example, on those acreages, so.
Of course, grouse don't like forest that much anyhow.
Oh, yeah, up there, the rough grouse, a lot of rough grouse.
I'm thinking sage and sharptail.
Oh, yeah, no, these are rough grouse, blue grouse. And I've got chickens at my little mini farm, and they pick up little grit pieces, you know. Well, they know the difference between a food source and something that's not a food source, but I'm not sure they know the difference between a pebble for their gizzard and a little chunk of, and that's what it looks like little pieces of rock. I don't know, I don't have any scientific expertise to base any of this on. I'm just saying it's a concern, whether it's prairie winkles for food sources and not as many prairie winkles, a lot more algae than used to be there. And where's the nitrogen baseline? We don't have one. It's been going on longer than we've been checking water quality.
So the phase one TMDL looked primarily at sediment temperature and those sorts of things, didn't look at nutrients as much if I recall, but phase two is, I mean, that's what it's all about, right? The nutrients in the lake and what about inlet. I would assume they're looking at sources and quantifying those or attempting to quantify those. And it's not just that, I mean, it's all the septic tanks and lawns that are fertilized and everything else that's developed in that area, in that watershed. So I would think that that's part of the overall TMDL plan, which I'm not sure this work should be replicating that, but it should be a piece of the puzzle that we're plugging in and saying, oh, and by the way, as part of the solution, we have to implement these plans here. So I don't know. I mean, I think this thing could blow up into a huge, you know, research study if you're not careful. So I think you have to draw from an existing, hopefully existing, thought-out study. But yeah, I don't know. Have you reviewed the scope of those two, the TMDL work? I don't even know where the second phase is at right now.
Our technical leads are reviewing those, yes, and to the extent, I mean, I think that what you said, Mayor Komet, is a valid point, that would be characterized as a reasonably foreseeable future action that should be considered. And the way that EIS is structured is to understand what existing conditions are. So to understand what the health of the watershed is, and then how existing conditions within the project area would change based on implementation of one of the action alternatives. So how would water quality change, for example, if you were to maintain it as a lake or if you were to maintain it as an estuary? The best thing that we can do is make sure that we're collaborating with the agencies that do have responsibility for those other plans like the TMDL and consider them as reasonably foreseeable. But the EIS itself begins with existing conditions and doesn't travel so far upstream for the focus on the project area and the area over which Enterprise Services maintains.
Well, I guess my argument would be that clean water, you know, it starts somewhere. If it's not coming from up there, if we've got water with contaminants in it, I don't know how we can make a good decision about Capitol Lake, that's all. That's our whole concern.
And I just want to say that I agree with you in the point and the support for a healthy watershed, and the explanation I wanted to provide was just about how the EIS was structured, but I completely agree with what you said there.
So that, following up, I do think the TMDL and looking at septic input and stuff is quite important, and because that probably does go directly into the lower water watershed areas, and it makes a difference. Certainly for a lot, it will make a difference.
Absolutely, and I think ecology has ended up perhaps the agency we have been coordinating with the most and our technical needs the most to understand current conditions, also to optimize the additional water quality sampling that is planned to occur, and understanding ecology's TMDL process and where they're landing in those requirements. Like Tessa said, with the expectation that the future alternative would meet state and federal, or aim to meet state and federal regulations and be in compliance.
But I made a similar comment about the sediment side of things too, and I to some degree, controlling what goes on in the system means controlling what goes on in the river basin, right?
Mhm.
So if you can cut off the sediment upstream through some of the, there's, again, phase one, TMDL identifies specific reaches of the river where there are huge sediment contributions coming from that need to be stabilized. That, I think, should be part of, any plan here to control sediment. It's a lot cheaper to do it up there than it is to pick it up after it's been flushed down the river into the bay. Maybe what we need to have at a future meeting is a little more detailed briefing about the two TMDLs. Maybe they'll be far enough along at that point where they talk about how they've identified the sources and addressed controlling them.
If, when we look at that, our goal is to know what's contributing to the health or decreased health of the whole watershed, upper and lower. And so we've heard concerns about fertilizer inputs, about sediment inputs, and about nutrients from septic systems. So those are all part of the picture. And, of course, we have a limited scope looking at the lower. This EIS is designed to look at the lower estuary. Of course, the upper part of the chutes affects it,
Absolutely.
but we can only do so much with this EIS.
But wouldn't it pick up what Commissioner Edwards is concerned about in the lower?
Well, we're definitely maximizing as much of existing available data, particularly from the county, on water quality and ecology, and then undertaking additional sampling of the lake basins into the fall. So that is the cumulative where that drainage has come to be located, so we do understand nitrogen and phosphorus and carbon, as well as the chemistry within the lake basins as it stands today. That was definitely a data gap that stakeholders communicated and that we saw value in. Granted, we're always trying to find that balance or right size. This is an EIS. We're not going to collect water quality samples for 2 years, but at least covering key seasons helps us ground what current conditions are so that we can understand, are we seeing elevated levels beyond what one would expect, or how can they change? But let us think about this again and go back to our technical leads as well. Thank you for the input. We appreciate it. That, I guess, is a good segue into the next agenda topic. This is our EIS technical analysis and coordination update. So we have a general topic for a bucket of items that we put in here. I think the first that we have is a field work update. That, Carrie, do you want to speak to this, just around the coordination with ecology?
Sure. So I think all of you know that ecology has the lead on the oil spill cleanup. So we've been coordinating closely with them on when and how we can get out on the lake to do some of our field work. We were able to coordinate with them and get our first sampling done in the lake at the end of May. So we had that first, we were able to get out in May as we wanted to. And we're continuing to work with them this month in hopes that they'll be able to finish up and we'll be able to get out in early July to do the bathymetry work, but the survey. So so we'll continue to monitor that.
We have been reaching into different arms of ecology, so whether that's their GIS folks, the modeling folks for water quality, TMDL, or spill response, mining all of their existing data, and also looking at that in the context of everything that's available. One of the things we have also heard, and I think that this was discussed at this executive work group level too, was value in including water quality sampling in Bud Inlet, concurrent with our water quality sampling at the lake basins. And again, trying to figure out how we do this in a very constrained budget has always been a bit of a mental puzzle. But what is great is in coordination with ecology, they are going to pick up and monitor or sample from a station in Bud Inlet for us. So we will be able to add in a sample location in Bud Inlet that they, ecology does routinely sample, but it's not on a monthly or annual basis, it's every couple years. And so this station wasn't slated for monitoring until next year, and we asked if they could do it this year so that we could bring that data into our EIS process. And they were great and able to work with us. So we're fortunate, we're excited to have that additional data coming in hand.
And that'll be on what time scale?
Yes, what is their schedule?
It's monthly, July through October.
I think July to
so.
October, yeah.
Mhm.
So it will be concurrent or capture part of the window that we'll be sampling the lake at the same time.
That's great.
So the lake sampling's May through October.
Yep.
And that's for, that's not related to the PCB stuff. It's
No.
more the nutrient, dissolved oxygen type.
Ex-
Temperature, pH, yeah.
Exactly, yep. Independent from spill response in Bud Inlet, just water quality monitoring.
Okay.
So I just heard that it was July through October, and did somebody said it's May through October?
Well, May through October is our EIS team's monthly sampling within the Capital Lake basins.
Okay.
Ecology will be monitoring and sharing the data of the Bud Inlet station, July through October.
So I'm gonna ask go ahead.
Go ahead, man.
A non-scientific question, or I'm not a scientist. So we're undergoing all this cleanup on the lake because of the spill. How can we test the water until we know that all this other spill has been mitigated?
Contained. Well, they're very close. So ecology is nearing completion of the cleanup. And the parameters that the water quality team is really focused on, some of the nutrients and conventionals, the carbon, the nitrogen, phosphorus, is a different focus relative to the PCBs that they're aiming to clean up. So we're mindful, and it is unfortunate the spill even occurred, let alone occurred at like terrible timing for the EIS and sampling. So it's a consideration, but there is some distinction between those focus parameters and analytes in which we're looking at.
So the PCBs aren't gonna change the temperature appreciably, they're not gonna change the pH, the nutrients, and so forth.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about the Percival Creek spill? That's couple 100,000 gallons of raw sewage.
From SPSCC.
Just heard about that. I was gone for a few days and just
Yeah.
saw that when I was
And,
catching up on email.
They're not even sure the length of time that that's been
Leaking.
Discharging.
more than leaking, yeah.
Yep.
So it's a big issue.
Absolutely.
And then you've got Indian Creek and Moxie Creek that flow through a lot of less than desirable areas, some homeless camp areas that's utilized for toilet, so that goes in. So.
If that
It's a-
wasn't going to happen, really.
Yeah, Moxley Creek is East Bay,
Right.
but your point about confounding variables and inputs is.
Yeah, I mean, how do you take those into consideration, I guess, when you're testing? Because I suppose it's worse at certain times than other times.
Yeah, in the summer.
I don't know.
Our coordination has been to ensure that our water quality leads understand that there has been this sewage spill, so that when they're looking at the data, if they see increased levels of fecal coliform, relative to long-term trends, that they would be able to understand, okay, it was this could reasonably be considered the input from that spill. And if that were to be the case, we're still looking at, or, it'll be, the data processing isn't happening in real time. They'll qualify that as part of the data set. So they know, they're aware, and
We're tracking it.
ecology is,
Well, in Thurston County,
Thurston.
I've talked to her this week, Jane, and so we're trying to coordinate on that one as well.
So the big issue, as I understand it, is how much is the lake contributing to the nutrient loading, organic loading coming out of the dam into the lower butt inlet. So are you, as part of this sampling, then trying to quantify the river and Personal Creek in terms of what's coming into the lake and then what's coming out of the dam to get a sense of what that dynamic is?
Well, there is the water quality kind of mass balance that Joy described when we met in April. So there's some elements of that, and also understanding the levels in the lake and now the Bud Inlet Station relative to what past conditions were or what Ecology's modeling has forecasted or predicted them to be. So that does allow us some assessment. The detailed level, do you have a better sense of?
I wouldn't be the right person to speak to that, but what I can say affirmatively is that they will be looking at those data sets to understand what that water quality is, what those inputs are, and then how they utilize that in their analysis to develop existing conditions is where it gets very sciencey.
The other item that we wanted to provide an update on is the funding and governance work group. What we plan on covering with them tomorrow and how that work on that front is moving forward. Besides the economic analysis itself, which is a component of the EIS, the funding and governance work, as you folks know, really defining shared funding and governance is on a parallel and critical path with the EIS. So Tessa, do you want to touch on that?
Sure. So we are working collaboratively with Echo Northwest. They're a firm that specializes in natural resource economics, and then funding and governance models similar to what we are tasked with here as part of this project through the funding and governance work. So what we have done is developed with them a process map similar to the process map that we use to help guide ourselves, our team, and our stakeholders through the EIS process to depict and describe milestones and outline the process to the funding and governance work group members of how we will move from our meeting tomorrow and the initial work that we did in phase 1 to develop those common attributes for a foundation of a funding and governance model, and take that into or develop that into a funding and governance model for the preferred alternative. So we will be reviewing this with them. What you'll see is that we anticipate and we would find real value in having a draft framework for a funding and governance model that could be applicable to all alternatives, timed for about when we're seeing the draft EIS, so next year. And then following that, a final framework that would be applied to the preferred alternative concurrent with or timed very similar to the final EIS in 2021. And what they'll speak to tomorrow is how that coordination looks in coordination with you, the executive work group, so that we're ensuring that you are brought along through that process with them and with us, and are kept apprised and have a good shared understanding of where we start, what our milestones are, and how we expect to achieve this shared goal of ours.
So this is where the two work groups really cross-pollinate, and getting you all together in one room just adds a lot of value so that we can talk collectively around what that structure and framework looks like, and how do we get from here to there and be successful in providing for all stakeholders, for ourselves, for the community, not just an evaluation of alternatives and a preferred, but also how to actually implement it and get it done. So we will touch on this at the end about the specific dates, but what we're thinking now is that it would be good to meet again in September if we can make that work with schedules, so that we could have a joint work group meeting that's executive and funding and governance that is focused on this framework. So less of project updates, really it would be the singular topic of focus. And then we think what makes sense is to meet with you again in November, where we bring forward the optimized alternatives. We have more to communicate out on the progress of the methodologies and the technical analysis. We think what that also does is hopefully catches everyone after the summer and before people are out for holidays or consume trying to get things done before the holidays, so September, November. Then we would next come back and see you, Q1 of 2020. Maybe that ends up February or something. That's a little far out to know exactly. So that again, we would be trying to stay close to quarterly, but shifting some months here and there. So we will get to those specific dates. And then part of what we, of course, always do is make sure that we transmit the slides and we transmit the meeting summaries. So your funding and governance folks tomorrow will probably provide you with an update and their sense of how the meeting goes and how we kind of roll out this process to them as well. But then those meeting summaries from the funding and governance work group will be available and provided too. Any questions on that?
So would the work that's done between now and November then be available in November, or is it a different focus entirely in November then?
Well, the funding and governance would be in September, and so it would be a joint session
Right.
that would review kind of options for framework and how we move forward. And then November, we would have more of the other EIS topics. So that's where we would say, here's the outcome of the measurable evaluation, step 1. Here's the optimized alternatives that head into the real technical analysis. So right now, in parallel with optimizing alternatives, the team is saying, here's our methodology of how we will assess alternatives and evaluate them. And then in parallel here is our approach for development of the funding and governance framework.
So the technical data and some of that analysis won't be available at that point?
Not by November.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
No, Chris, did you?
So first of all, thank you for being sensitive to the timing of what happens in real life. And the fact that we would get this before the busy holiday season actually starts is, I think, is a real boon and an awareness on your part of what we're going to be doing as far as committee members. The second part is I think of this is I have a more of a technical question of once this funding governance work group approves this and perhaps we approve it, I'm going to assume that this is going to be incorporated in our larger roadmap, so it becomes part of that roadmap, so we have a document, a single document that we can look at for the process.
Well, the roadmap process map is as much as we can fit on one piece of paper now. So I probably can't literally incorporate it, but we did try, like Tessa said, to make sure that there was some synergy and continuity between this process and we have used process a lot, and our phase 2 process map, so that some of the major milestones and timelines line up. So we did try to make sure that there was a sense of kind of quarters, but what was really critical is what are our deliverables and outcomes that come forward in the draft and final EIS for stakeholder and community digestion and review. So I think that it ends up, there's our phase 2 process map, and this is, the addenda that is with it. Was that what you were thinking, or a little bit different?
No, that is kind of what I was thinking.
Okay.
I think one of the strengths of our roadmap is to explain to our stakeholders, especially our legislative and financial OFM type of stakeholders, is to be able to show one piece of paper and explain all the activities that have to happen in a defined period of time, and this is gonna be of great interest to them.
But what's a good point, I think that you're asking, I think, like in my mind, I just hadn't even got there yet, was, that is a living document that periodically as needed we update. So we can look at it relative to, you know, how we kind of tentatively called out topics that we'll discuss in the meetings. So we could update it from that perspective, fit in a couple more squares somewhere for funding and governance,
Sure.
in which we're trying to capture some of this work. So that would be a good way to kind of handshake the main process with. That's a good suggestion.
I think just some thought to it, you know, so that we're not presenting a bunch of different papers to
Yep.
folks. It's that whole visualization process.
There's some roll-up kind of in there.
Right.
Question, just more of a comment to think about putting a placeholder on the process maps for going back out to, say, my city council, Pete's council, the commissioner's board, to report out on this funding and governance modeling, because I don't know, because this is new territory, you know, for us to approve something as one elected official, I don't know if I'm speaking for my whole my council.
No,
I
that's a
need to
good
have that
point.
feedback from my group before I can feel comfortable voting on something, because they need to support it as well.
So let's try to, I think that's a great point. It seems like in September, when we are sitting with your funding and governance teams and all the executives, to have a topic that is, when we are fleshing this out more, what is the frequency of the updates and presentations to the boards and councils that is appropriate to make sure they're brought along?
Maybe we just do it all together and save time. I mean, that's
Yeah.
fine too, just notice the meeting and get everybody in the room at the same time. So it's not like you.
So you don't have to have
It's less
6 extra
expensive for you guys
meetings.
too,
Yeah.
you know, to go around and talk to all of us.
That would be great,
Yeah.
you know, if we put, yeah. I mean, we love going to everybody. Yeah, that would be good. Okay, these are both really great suggestions. And again, you know, we know that this is small, it's on a screen. Part of this is that we are just moving on so much so quickly that these things are finalized 2 days before we meet with you type of thing.
Is
So
it available online, or when would it be?
Not yet.
'Cause it's not been vetted.
Yes, well,
Okay.
it's still draft. We'll review it with funding and governance work group tomorrow, but we can distribute it when we send out these slides so that you have it in a fuller form as well, and just, you know, make sure.
I can't read that.
Yeah, I'm sure
I
it's like,
can't, so.
And if you could, just remind us what the updated links are, where we can find things online, because some of the links are new and some of the old links don't exist anymore. So those reminders are always helpful.
got it. Let's make sure, we can put a couple of those in the email transmittal too, just so you have everything in one spot. Okay. Okay, so we're doing good on time. What we transition to next, what we've called it on the agenda item is our technical work group methodology review. So we want the benefit of bringing this forward to you and getting your sense of things, and so that you have an understanding of the team's approach for the different technical analysis. I know that all of you have constituents that are asking you questions and coming to you as well, but we plan on going and diving into more detail with the technical work group tomorrow. So in addition to the water quality methodology that Carrie has spoke to, and the economic methodology memo process that is in progress as well, there's also hydrodynamic and sediment transport modeling, land use, shorelines, recreation, wetlands and vegetation, and fish and wildlife. So that's really at the heart of what we want to review with the technical work group today, and we thought that we could do an overview for you, kind of hot off the presses, to give you a sense of it and answer any questions as well. It's our chance to also see if there's input you have that we carry forward tomorrow with the technical work group too. One of the things that we've kind of communicated a couple times now to different stakeholder groups, and that we will again tomorrow with the technical work group, is the EIS level of analysis. And we touched on this in April. This particular slide was reviewed with the technical work group. And I think that the example at the bottom is really helpful. And so this ends up just a foundational kind of reminder for us that again, we are not at a specific project implementation study. We are not in the middle of a design of a project, when you're advancing to 60%, 90%. We're really at that EIS conceptual design level where we need sufficient information to support a comparative evaluation of the impacts between alternatives and not necessarily to understand every level of detail. So the technical side of all of us, sometimes that's a really hard thing for us to grapple with. We need to make sure that our work is sufficient to support the conclusions about proposed mitigation measures. So would mitigation measures feasibly and adequately mitigate potential impacts? As folks are well aware, that is a critical element of the EIS. We always talk about that relative to sediment transport in particular. We wanted to include these two other little items, again, as just reminders. SEPA specifically states that EISs should be concise and readable documents, and an EIS is not required to include all information conceivably relevant to a proposal. And then the last one I think is helpful as well. EIS analysis helps to support permit review, but it is often understood and expected that additional information will be required and developed during design and permitting. So for example, the evaluation of water quality may not be at a sufficient level now in our EIS to secure a 401 water quality certification for project implementation. So the expectation is that when the preferred alternative is identified in the EIS, there is a significant amount of work to advance that design, to advance the technical analysis, and that would be required to secure the necessary permits. So this isn't just a kind of one size fits all and this is the way it'll be. There will be a lot that will be further studied.
May I ask a question? And maybe way back when you've already talked about this, and I might have spaced out or whatever, or I might not have been available. But when you're talking about SEPA, and because there are federal permits available, are you still going to need them?
Great question. Tessa's perfect at answering that. You could do it in your sleep.
So this is, as you mentioned, a SEPA EIS, and a NEPA, an environmental review under NEPA is required before federal permits can be issued. So that happens, concurrent to the federal permitting process for the preferred alternative.
Oh, okay.
What I would like to say though is that to the extent that we can be forward compliant with NEPA or look at things that would help to streamline that review, we are being aware of that because we know it's the next step. And so it's in our minds to help the process in the future.
It's definitely been part of the benefit that we've seen in having engagement from the federal agencies as well. So the Corps' ad hoc participation, we have DAP, the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, is a reoccurring technical work group member. So having access to those folks that are comfortable to say, hey, under our process, you would need to make sure X and Y, we can build that in to make it, like you said, more streamlined.
I noticed you mentioned EPA earlier too, so that popped into my mind. But I
EPA.
wanted to double check.
Got it. Yes.
Jesse, you mentioned something about all the information may not be included in
Yes.
your dissertation here.
Yes, all information conceivably relevant to a proposal is not necessarily required to be included.
Who makes that determination about what's relevant and what's not?
That's a great question.
It's between the technical leads and the project team and the lead agency, which in this case is Enterprise Services. And ultimately, an EIS is a disclosure document that allows decision makers and the lead agency to make an informed decision. So the material that helps them to do that should be in there and helps them to compare against the alternatives. The level of analysis is really to support that comparison, not the minutia associated with each potential option, so that they can select between the range of alternatives and then get more nitty-gritty on the preferred after that.
How are any disputes resolved on that?
Well, there's a couple elements in terms of hopefully avoiding disputes, is that by having access to or convening the work groups, we're able to review the methodologies of what is the scope of the technical work with like the technical work group to receive that input. So some of the early feedback was stakeholders being the work group and the community saying, we think it's important that you sample water quality and understand current conditions. So that was something that we heard as being relevant and valuable to our process. So that was incorporated. So we hope that by convening the work groups, we are avoiding some of that potential concern because we are soliciting information and collaborating. So that's on the front end, how we're trying to build in that work.
There's not a specific process in place for that, other than we all want to get along and get it all figured out.
No, there would be.
Would there be?
Yeah,
There,
the DES has an administrative guidelines for their implementation of SEPA, and I'm sure it has some kind of review appeal process in it, although I don't know what it is.
Sure.
And then beyond that is the courts.
I'm not familiar with all the review processes, but I think there is a clause in there. We can look it up and bring that back to us.
And the state law that is referred to here as WAC 197, Commissioner Edwards, is really about making the document readable, concise, and useful. It's kind of a paperwork reduction guideline. And so one of the things it says is, that I think you'll be interested in, this is in the state law. Description of the existing environment and the nature of environmental impact shall be limited to the affected environment and shall be no longer than is necessary to understand the environmental consequences of the alternatives. So that's-
Lawyers probably have several opinions about that, I suppose, too. But, yeah, no, I just asked the question, just wondered, I'm not anticipating anything.
It's a good question.
it is. All right, so I think what we'll do is spend the next, kind of maybe 10 minutes.
Maybe we just do sediment since it'll be
The
third-party
key.
reviewed and then
Yeah, let's
defer
do
to
that.
others.
Really, I guess what we can say is let's focus. I think Tessa's got a good idea there. The hydrodynamic and sediment transport modeling is particularly important and critical to this EIS. What we can say around land use, shorelines, recreation, wetlands, vegetation, and fish and wildlife. What the methodology is obviously varies based on one of those particular topics. The framework of the methodology, though, across those different topics is consistent in terms of the foundation of the analysis is always to gain the best understanding of current conditions from existing data sources. And this is where your folks, technical work group members, have been invaluable. We've gotten so much like from WDFW even, and the city has been amazing, both cities, and the county has given us a ton. So we have been reaching in. So that's to say that all of these, really the foundation is to mine all of the existing data, whether that is land use, GIS-based, tax assessor data, or it's recreational data. We plan on having recreational surveys in the summer and fall to solicit and get more information on use of this resource. And then from there, building out the ability to compare benefits and impacts of the alternatives. And that often can include habitat zoning mapping, understanding changes to vegetation and wetland that would occur under the various alternatives. We've kind of touched on some of that today that is quite significant for this EIS. So these methodologies we'll be reviewing tomorrow in detail with the technical work group as well. But we will also have 2 leads with us tomorrow for the technical work group. So we will have the lead of the hydrodynamic and sediment transport modeling, and then we will have the lead with ESA that will go through, all the other ones I said. It's kind of a lot. But Tessa will give us an overview of sediment transport and have the chance to answer questions, right?
Yep, that sounds great. And as Carrie mentioned earlier, and part of the reason why this is potentially relevant or especially relevant to just get in front of you today is because we are developing that draft methodology, moving it into review by the third parties, and then when that's finalized from that process, making it available online. And that is quite unique. That is not often the way that it's done in a SEPA process, but for the purposes of transparency and to allow those that are really interested in understanding how we are undertaking this technical work to give them the opportunity to see that. So, this summer we expect that the 3 methodologies that have completed that third-party expert review would be available. And so this is one of them, the water quality we briefed you on last meeting.
Yeah.
So let's just
Jump in.
Oh, you're already on it. Okay. So hydrodynamics and sediment transport modeling methodology. So the goal is ultimately to compare the alternatives through the numerical modeling. And we know that the water and sediment are important to understand under any alternative, whether that be the managed lake or an open system, the estuary or hybrid. And so our team of experts will build a model to help us understand that and really to inform a number of our analyses. And the model will help us to answer some specific questions that are applicable across the board. So, one, how high or low is the water under current conditions and potential future conditions, also taking into consideration future sea level rise and varying inputs under different forecasted future scenarios. Also, how does that water move through the system? And what are those areas of erosion? And in the areas that have been eroded, where is that sediment being deposited? That last question particularly will help us to understand potential areas of impact and therefore areas of special focus for mitigation measures to avoid or minimize those impacts. So, like with water quality, there are some existing studies that we will evaluate, and this model will improve upon past studies. When we were talking with the technical leads, it was great to hear how, some of the former studies, the resolution in specific areas of that model could be increased by up to 40-fold. And I just thought that was fascinating.
And we were able to have calls with USGS, who did the past modeling, and ask them what were the lessons learned. What did you think could have done better or differently in hindsight? So we've been able to kind of glean and learn from them as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, and we have been doing that with the technical leads that have done studies before us with the agencies to make sure we're learning that across the board. The model will help to address what is forecasted, but this is a tricky system in that there are different sizes of sediment, and so, in the South Basin, it's more cobble and larger rocks, where as you progress downstream, it's sand and silt and clay, and those act very differently in the way they move and the way that they settle. And then also just noting the difference in the alternatives. The systems behave very differently, and so the model will need to have that good resolution to look at it carefully and provide good information to the other analyses and to the decision makers. I wanted to note that the model will look at the area from Tumwater Falls to Outer Bud Inlet. And when it's constructed, the input in it is constructed considering bathymetry, which, as we mentioned earlier in the meeting, is expected to be collected within the lake basins in July, so next month, and flow from the river into the basin, and tides from Bud Inlet backwards, and water levels at the dam, and there are a number of existing real conditions that are being utilized to construct the model holistically. And then when it's done, you get something like what's shown on this page here, and I find these particularly helpful. These are examples from the past modeling, and ours will look similar to this, but what it does, in my opinion, is that it very clearly conveys the information to all stakeholders of what the model has estimated future conditions to be like. So working from left to right, you'll see that this is describing water level, and so we'll be able to understand what water level looks like under the alternatives for existing and future conditions, and the water movement within the system, and that would be different between the alternatives. And then finally, this last one, which I know a number of us are interested in, is how sediment moves and where it settles. And these, again, become a platform for decision making, but also a platform for our other technical analyses. And that is the high-level overview. Tomorrow, we want to make sure that the technical work group does have that opportunity to provide, their technical expertise as is applicable. So as Jesse mentioned, our lead will be there, and he's got something like 20 slides to go through. So he really gets into the nitty-gritty details of it, and the notes on that will be available online to the public. And again, the methodology memo will be when it's completed.
Is it okay if we sit in this meeting as members of the public?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And what
absolutely.
time is it?
It is 1 to 3
1 to
tomorrow.
3.
Yep, planning and governance
And it'll
is
be
at 9.
downstairs. The big
Will it be in the presentation?
Yes, yes.
Sure.
You mentioned just briefly sea level rise adaptation and the city with the port. Jonathan, port here.
Pardon me?
No, the port, it's not here.
Oh,
Yeah, works right here.
And lot.
It's a damn time. It really is.
How is that still being considered now that we've adopted our sea level rise plan for the city? How is that going to be considered in this whole process?
We have looked in detail, our technical leads, at that sea level rise, at the projections, and at the proposed adaptation strategies, and they are considering it. I think 2 weeks ago we were on an hour-and-a-half call looking through that, understanding what our projections should be to sync with that the best that we can. And so I think that the best thing that I can report to you is that it's absolutely being considered, and then getting into the technical weeds, we can see if our lead can speak to that tomorrow.
And Cheryl, the city and the lot have your 3 stages of possible options. So the sea level rise that came out of our joint planning process. The port recently signed a resolution saying we need to develop that level of understanding for the port as well. So we've made theoretically a commitment to continue our study of working with city and lot, so we can get a plan that's as detailed as yours.
So, when you talk about outer Bud Inlet, what's the transect line of, that determines the outer Bud Inlet? I mean, what?
Yeah,
what-
how far
Yeah,
north
where
does
does
that
it go?
extend?
It's just south of Gull Harbor,
Oh, okay,
so it's pretty far out there. Yeah.
okay.
So my understanding is you've only measured the lake itself. You're not planning on doing any existing contours of the lower Bud, particularly the west bay?
We have some of the bathymetry from Bud Inlet that we'll be using for the model. We have bathymetry from the port and from the core for the nav channel, and some areas have outside of that, so we'll be able to use that. But under the EIS, you're correct, we're not doing a new survey extending into Bud Inlet at this time.
How old is that data?
The core's survey is 2018, I think, and then, I think that's right, and then the port is a little bit older, it might be 2016.
That's what I had in my brain.
Does that, okay, maybe then that, we either are wrong together, or that's right. So, it was relatively recent. And Jeff, you've had a comment or question?
Clarification, I expect. Sediment, erosion, deposition, of course, that characterization is 2-dimensional. I assume that the actual inputs and available data are 3-dimensional. In other words,
That's correct.
we have elevation, so it's not just where a certain amount of sediment is accumulating, but what the ultimate elevations of those accumulations are.
That's correct. We also have, in connecting with folks, and the port team was really helpful too. The port did work as part of their bud inlet coordination with ecology that had geochronology cores and estimated sedimentation rates for a couple of the berth areas. So that is another data point for us to understand, based on that coring effort, what the identified or estimated sedimentation rates kind of are now today under existing conditions. So that's additional data that we have. And I think something that Mayor Komet really contributed to in the phase 1 process was looking at and thinking about sediment control structures, or where you can divert and change sediment flow and deposition. So that's something that we're working with and understanding in the modeling effort. It allows us to see if some changes really make a meaningful difference on where the sediment comes to be located, both in just blanket presence and also thickness. And that has that nexus with mitigation measures as well. So, yeah.
So is this data available to us to look really closely?
Well, this is the USGS older work that is publicly available. And then, like Tessa said, the sediment transport modeling methodology that will the memo that's a summary of that will undergo third-party review will also be made publicly available. So you'll be able to read everything and understand where it landed as well. And to Tessa's point that I think was really good is we absolutely are just trying to be as open and transparent as possible.
So that's on your website?
And not yet. It will be. It's in preparation now.
Okay.
Yep.
You mean this study? Yeah, this study.
Oh, USGS is definitely available.
So you go to the USGS site or to the Capitol?
It's available on DES's Capitol Lake webpage. Yeah, but we can send a link so you don't have to.
Enterprise Services has a Capital Lake reports page. It
Mhm.
has all of the reports that were done during
You
CLAM.
could read for
and-
hours.
We'll send
But
you
yeah, we can
a
send
link or
you-
attachment just to
Just
save the
in case.
hunting for
I
that.
probably have it, but. I
No,
would
no
want it
worries.
again, 'cause
Well, they're gonna generate an updated one, which
Yeah.
will be really interesting.
Yeah.
Because this one's over a decade old.
Yeah.
When you take into consideration your sea level rising portion of this, will you look at, say, the past 50 years, what change maybe has taken place, and compare it to what the estimated change will be taking place in the next 50? I don't know exactly what you have in mind there. I mean, are you gonna make a projection, or?
Do you want to speak to her?
Yeah, we would use projections from that were adopted through the joint planning process that occurred here locally, that were based on work done by the University of Washington Science Climate Panel. Maybe I got that name slightly wrong, and I can't speak to the science that they looked at to come up with those projections, but those are kind of across the board the standards that are being used that we would use as well.
Yeah. So, and it'll be clear and disclosed what projection scenario, risk scenario that the team ultimately used for the EIS, because the sea level response plan has a range. And so that's something we're working on. I know right now a lot of times we're saying it's in progress, we're working on it, we're just in kind of the throes of it.
I don't know if I shared that article with you, but the National Academy of Sciences just a couple of weeks ago published a new meta-study on sea level rise, and the bottom line is they're recommending that planners use the high end of estimates 2 years for the end of the century. I'll send that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to cruise ships coming right up to the.
There you go. There you go. We're not going to be worried about vacation because sea level rise is going to save it, right?
And I'll just balance it out.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so I'm going to transition us to our next meeting. In case stars align today, we're going to throw out the dates. So, like we mentioned earlier, the thought is that we would have a joint executive work group, funding and governance work group meeting in mid-September. and then meet with you in November. And I think that we can coordinate on the scheduling of the November executive work group only meeting via email with a doodle poll. It's far enough a ways out. For September, and again, people can get back to us, but just in case we all say, aha, this is the day, we're looking at September 11th, 12th, or 13th.
What time?
They're open, that's far enough out.
Afternoons help me.
13, I have a couple of conferences.
13th is your best day?
13th is the best day. It's a Friday, sorry, Friday the 13th.
That is your best.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Zeta.
I could
Yeah,
do the
there's
afternoon.
a passenger ferry conference that 4 people can be attending.
See, this is just so helpful just to know that. If there's some
Yeah.
dates, like I think for Commissioner Hutching last time, we knew that there was a date, we just needed to ixnay, right? So what is the 13th like for other folks? If you,
13th is great for me.
Jeff, how about you?
In the afternoon.
Afternoon of the
1 o'clock.
13th? It could work?
Whatever. That's way too far out to plan.
Well, that's why it's so great to do scheduling now where it looks better. Okay. And
I'm
we
with
don't.
Jeff.
Okay. Okay.
That's a Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Say 1 o'clock on that day or something like that? And Chris, we can coordinate with Lindsay for yours.
Yeah,
Morning
I'm the
is
slave to
better.
the committee, so.
Okay.
The afternoon of the 12th is best.
You and Cheryl can arm wrestle the morning and afternoon.
I know, I know. I'm just more awake in the morning,
At least, but that's.
right
I
now.
know,
I
after
don't know if
lunch
that's
it
a
is
firm
hard.
thing or I didn't
Yeah,
chance it.
yeah.
Okay.
That
If
should-
I had some candy.
Well, we still have
I'd
to
be
pull
better.
the funding and governance work
Yeah.
group,
Let's do
so.
that next time.
There you go.
Candy for Cynthia.
So we're looking at September 13th?
Well, that would be wonderful to see if tomorrow we can go to the funding and governance work group folks and say, can you make the 13th work? Because this is the tricky one, right?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
joint. So we've doubled the calendars that we're coordinating with.
Do you have a lot of people that need to come down from Seattle?
Yeah, I was thinking the afternoon batch, but,
Yeah, sorry.
no, it's not. Well, it's us. Yeah.
Oh.
So,
You should
just
just
get to
come the
hang
night
out, so-
before.
and I like hanging out with her in the car.
Yeah,
so-
The traffic won't be as bad going north.
That's
in
true.
the afternoon.
That's true, we're not,
On a Friday
yeah,
afternoon,
it's not the
everybody's
5-hour
in the
trip to,
city,
Yeah.
to Portland or
It'll
something.
be after Labor Day, so it always cuts down.
Okay.
I don't think you can say it's better going north as I go north.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a Friday afternoon coming out of the city.
Oh,
A lot of
coming
people
out of the
escaping
city?
All right, but we know that the 11th and 12th, Commissioner Zeta, we would lose you.
Yes.
Okay,
We could do noon and have lunch.
that would be fun.
Are you offered?
All right, well, we'll, again, check with Funding and Governance Work Group. We'll see if we get lucky. There's a chance that when we reach out to you, you'll see an email and a doodle poll, probably from me or Carrie, that might have the 16th and 17th or different date, if we couldn't get it to work. But we thought we would check. That's anyway that around the timing we're aiming for.
16, 17 sounds good to me.
That may be viable.
Might as well check them.
Anyone, again, I don't even know what our calendar is, but 16th and 17th, does anyone know if that's a no-go? Oh. I don't want to miss this one.
Okay, well, maybe we'll have to do a doodle poll. We'll
Maybe
see.
it will
We'll
be
see
a
what the
doodle poll.
13th looks like for folks.
Funding and governance says
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
We'll tell them the bosses said 13th.
Yeah. Be there.
Okay, and, just feedback from folks. We know that something we heard last time was providing materials in advance. We will definitely, that will be the plan for September because we are bringing substantial content. It's not that this is insubstantial, but we're still in that just the thick of it mode. Is there anything else that folks would want to share that would make your role or participation better or help you in your?
Cynthia says candy.
Some kind of something that will keep me awake.
I like where your head is at.
All right,
Yeah, I
I
can totally get
noted it.
behind that.
They call these eye candy, is what I understand.
So that's why I said, can you get that?
All right, snacks are good. We all like snacks. Yeah, there we go. We rotate. Yeah. Whoever misses the meeting, they have to bring the treats for the next one. Okay. And then I do want to, I know that we're running a little behind here, but open up the opportunity for public comment as well. If there's anyone today that just wants to provide input. Hi, Sue.
I just have a couple questions. One is, will you be looking at greenhouse gas emissions in the lake as the plants die, like methane release, towards September, August, in that time? Just that's a question, there's something to consider.
Okay.
Because dam, reservoirs, lakes are infamous for releasing methane. And then also, the idea of what an estuary would have looked like historically. I hope that we're not just looking at after European settlement, but as an estuary was before anybody got here. And it was being used for its resources by the first people that were here. So that visualization is important.
Thank you. We're jotting that down now. Bob?
Yeah, that raises a question. For your studies here, what do you anticipate the opening to be? Is it along the lines of the core and ecology of the terminal?
The opening of the open system. The design team right now is evaluating that.
Okay.
Yep.
Because in talking about historic openings, it's 2,000 or 3,000 feet, and that's not realistic in today's situation. I think ecology has called for 600 feet.
Yeah, or 500.
500
Yes.
plus the slope.
Yep.
About
Yep.
600 feet.
Yeah, that is actually something that the team has been discussing and reviewing the origin of the different widths that have kind of been used in the past. So it's a good question, but we just don't know exactly where that is yet. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you again for your time today. If you have any additional thoughts or input you want to share, please email Carrie or us, and we'll be following up and get links to current materials and probably doodle polls and all kinds of good stuff.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.